this obviously is more focused around the challenges, but actually the issues around adopting an annual plan, which is great. So tremendous to have you all here, and thank you for doing so. Health and safety is behind me. I trust that you know that well. Apologies, Margie, Matt and Derek, full apologies for the day. I know we have workshops, but note also, Sarah, that you need to shoot through definitely by 1:30. And with my iron hand of management, we will be definitely out of here before 3 o'clock, Julie. Okay, rightio. So look, I'd just like to sustain those apologies. Could I...
sorry, Tom?
Could
I put in, I need to be out of here by 2.
By 2. Okay, thank you, Tom. Yep. That's a pity. You'll miss a tremendous risk discussion led by your chair. I'll just note that you're not there.
Or the appetite.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay, so we're good to go. Have I got a seconder? Thank you. Appreciate that, Christine. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those against, is carried. Reading notices of leaves of absence. Any matters coming up in these papers that you need to make references for? No? Great. I haven't been caught of any extraordinary items. Okay. So we had the minutes of our meeting, last meeting on 4 December. I'm going to move here. We take it as true and correct. I was seconder. Darren, is there any corrections, changes that folk need to make on those? I want to say they look pretty much like the meeting I was at. I will always look through the recommendations for things that are coming up. I just noted that under item 7.11G, staff were requested to review the investment liability management policy workshops today, and I think in the financial report paper as well. So I'll treat that as a moving in progress feast, but we know where that's at this stage. Any other comments, questions? Well, motion. That was you, Darren, sorry. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, it's carried. I have no requests for public forum, so that gets us up to our first item. Somebody down there is going to talk to me about the work program, or are you going to talk to me about the work program? Oh, okay, there we go, there we go. Sorry to put the fear of God into you guys down the back there, don't worry. We'll hear from you as it comes on, okay? Yeah.
So thank you, Mr. Chair and councillors. So just presenting the work program for this particular meeting. The core reason for this meeting, of course, is for the annual plan. It doesn't usually have a lot of other items in the agenda, hence the reason why it's a little bit smaller, and the reason why, if you'll remember, that you'll be back here again on the 19th of March to go through a rather large agenda. Just in terms of this agenda, though, we had noted that we were going to bring 3 water reports up just around consent renewals and discharge consents. We've just put those, we've just deleted those for now, and we'll reinstigate them when some more certainty comes around the 3 waters legislation. In terms of the independent review that we also had on here, we're just potentially going to move that to a later date, but we just haven't quite worked out what date that will be. And we've added a new report just over the strategic project, and that's going to be added to the work plan, and at every quarterly meeting we will also just update you on that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anne. It all makes sense, and there's fair warning there. The next meeting's a big one. Actually, in the sidelines, while we were waiting for the start of the meeting, I said to Anne, Julie, this is me trying to be even more efficient. I'm starting to wonder whether we do too much work. So if you folk have thoughts, I'm always open to an offline discussion about how we can be more efficient, including my chair. So I just leave it open. It's a conversation I've sponsored elsewhere where we do really good work. Hopefully it's you might say, Bruce, well, what would you take out? And that's always a tough question, and it may not be that there is. So 19 March is going to be big. So thank you for that, Anne. The motion is that we receive and we note the amendments. I'll move that from the chair to item seconder, please. Thank you, Rob. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, it's carried. Righty. So I think it's Joe and Janie. Is that right? Thank you. We've got the 6 month results. towards the year end, always an interesting time. So thank you for your work behind the scenes, maintaining our financial records, but then also, so we're in your hands, guys, as you see fit, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Joe and I will be presenting the financial report for the period ended 31 December. We're just going to get straight into it. Operating income for the period is 2.8 million, or 4% above projection, and that is mainly due to the proceeds of the sale of the residential land at Luxmore subdivision. While operating expenditure for the period is $1.6 million, or 2.1% below projection, and we have some underspends in community leadership, community resources, environmental services and transport, and the reasons are detailed on page 35 and 36 of your agenda. Capital expenditure is $3.4 million, or 12% under projection, and this is mainly due to overall district-wide transport capital expenditure being $1.6 million under projections, with rehabilitations, metalling, drainage renewals, and traffic services all running slightly behind expectation. And some of our multi-year sewerage capital costs being $930,000 under projection. I will now hand over to Joe to discuss the Treasury section of this report. Thank you.
Thanks, Joni. The Treasury section is very similar to all previous months. We are relatively consistent, and we've still got that breach in our interest rate risk area, but that's something that's currently under review with the investment advisors. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Cheers, Anne.
Oh, and one other thing we wanted to touch on is happy birthday, Anne.
Oh, well done. Today.
I had no choice, did
You
I?
had no choice, okay, all right, okay. Well,
There will be
thank you for
payback. Thank you for that.
We should note that in the minutes, but CFO is a year older.
Excuse the pun on the payback.
Yeah. I hope you have a good day and somewhere down the track. Perhaps the best thing to do is finish this meeting, it would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? Okay, folk, we've got the results here, and indeed I just would want to reflect a sense of heading towards year end where things are at. So do we have questions at this stage, Jodie? Or indeed actually there's a few there. The risk of sounding like I'm interested, given I live in town these days, what happens to that one, the money from the Luxmore sale, subdivision sale, where does that go? Does that just go into the pot for reduced debt? Does it go into a special fund, whatever? I don't ask that question. Sarah, you might know the answer, I don't.
So it goes into a Fiordland, there's a Luxmore reserve, which is controlled or divvied up for the use by the Fiordland Community Board.
Okay, cool. Look, no, thank you for that. My interest is obviously clearly what ultimately is of gain to our I guess our ratepayer generally. I mean, I appreciate that this is still a gain and it's reduced, and I'm just interested to know.
So I guess in recent time, that was the reserve that they used to pay off some of the old existing loans from the original purchase of the airport. So it has been used in that local area up until this date.
Sarah, I can assure you I'm not trying to get my hands on it. So that's great, thank you.
Sitting there for when it's needed.
Many council meetings where those sorts of words have been said as well, Sarah, which is great. Look, the revenue side, I was just interested in the transport, and partly I know you're there. It does suggest that actually we're behind our current NZTA program. Is there any sort of general comment you can give us as to why?
Yeah, happy to. So probably the biggest risk for particularly the first season is around our bridges. Even though we've been allocated the funding, that hasn't been released to us. So we're looking at carrying that forward. Trying to be realistic, I suppose. That it's unrealistic to try and at this stage deliver this season.
Yeah.
And then also some of the activities where, like your unsealed methane, there's some at the start of the season. We'll back that up later on in the season, where the focus over this course of, I suppose, the warmer summer months is more on the sealed road repairs and maintenance. So, yeah, and that includes our payment rehabilitation as well, the timing aspect of that. With funding approvals coming in late, how much we could confidently commit to this season.
Why do the approvals come late?
Just with NZTA funding, it only came through in September.
Yeah. So this is their non-synchronisation with our
Correct.
financial year.
Yeah. And being that it's the 3-year funding sequence, year one always tends to be a bit of an uphill battle to deliver on the work program when there's a delay in funding.
I mean, in a general, probably slightly ignorant level, my comments are really based around, we've got such a reduced program, not through our choice, Rob, but actually we need to do what we can do. Given again, this is not a negative statement, given the challenge of maintaining our network. The fact that we're actually behind a much reduced program worries me that actually the wear and tear, the residual deferred maintenance that we're building up is perhaps more than we could want to recognise.
Will be, and that deficit, I suppose, in terms of upkeep of the road network, as we don't get the funding, will increase over year. That the gap becomes bigger and bigger. We can't.
Yeah, so that actually got me away from you engineers. You'll be pleased to know, Hartley, looking at my accountants down here. That interests me in terms of whether, in fact, when it comes to year-end valuations, we might have some form of impact on our valuations. And I'm just wondering whether that's something that should be looked at. I mean, I know we have the valuations, but it's actually that's concept of impairment. I mean, that's really what in an accounting term, that's what I'm talking about, which is...
So certainly our valuations for the last a number of years now have shown impaired bridges. So the bridges that are closed or have are on reduction, so they have been going through there. Up until now, we haven't really had roads that would have come into that space, but there have been roads that came through to council late last year that if they remain as sealed, then we will have to be looking at what we've got them listed in the database and looking at how the valuers are dealing with those.
Not unsurprisingly, I've got a strong desire that our accounting reflect our practice, and indeed if there's residual stuff there, this idea of deferment to the extent that it can be recognised in an accounting sense, I'm very keen to see that it's in there, because I noticed with it in here, Rob, we've got all the things that have been happening around talking with Wellington, and I'd like to think that our accounting also represents reasonably and transparently the slight sense of desperation we have here around maintaining what probably for us in many ways is our core asset.
So there is at the present, I couldn't tell you the exact number of kilometres, but there was 2 or 3 that you brought up in the report last year.
That was started last month actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So look, I'd probably dwell a wee bit too much, but I'd like to think that I mean, it may be that impairment is the wrong concept, but I can't help but feel there's something happening here which may give rise to our need to represent this fairly through our accounting and our annual report, which supports the broad story about the challenges around governance. Jaspreet, sorry, I think you've got a question.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, and sort of following on your sentiment, listening to Hartley speak that the first year of a 3-year program with NZT and getting approval seems to be always an uphill battle. Perhaps there's a lesson here that our estimates need to be more on the conservative side, because a 22% running behind certainly gives an impression of dropping the ball somewhere. So perhaps that could be taken into account. I'm not quite sure how you financial wizards do it, but is there some way that this is...
So to be fair, we've historically, particularly for maintenance lines, we look at the last 3 years to work out where we phase the items through. So taking your point on board, it may be that actually we should be comparing year 1 to year 1 and picking it up that way. There is also, and it won't account for all of it, there is also a little bit of, we've had a reasonably good summer in terms of them being able to get and do the hard top work. So some of the crews being involved from South Roads, etc., can't do both. So they know that our drainage work and our metalling and it reseals, but our metalling will still be sitting around in a month or two's time when the weather window is still good for that. So each year depends on how good that. They'll do as much of the hard seal or the sealed road work as they can, when they can, and then they'll fit this other stuff around to keep their crews busy. So it's possible that our phasing just hasn't reflected that in this year as well.
Thank you. I guess my concern is just that it's better if you under-promise and over-deliver and possibly a lesson here. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's it.
Sorry, Hartley, go for it.
I suppose, take the points on board, but some of the challenges we do face, I'll pick on the bridges, is different criteria around releasing their funding, which we didn't have in previous 3 years, which came in late. So there can be those funding criteria that come as part of the funding approval that we may not necessarily be aware of that impact.
I appreciate that.
That's exactly what's happened this time around.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Is there a depreciation factor to any of this?
You mean into the accounting?
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I'm using probably by the words impairment. Not as depreciation, but actually, is there some form of, I'm looking down at my fellow accounts here for the definition of impairment, but in a sense, something that has fundamentally changed the way we have to look at the asset. And if in fact we are building up a substantial deferred maintenance, and clearly around bridges we are, but I sense from the discussions you're having around dropping tar seal and re-gravelling, but even here just trying to undertake our program, it's going to go in cycles. So it's really a question of it's in a cycle and it gets fixed, or is there some form of permanent impact that would effectively reflect the valuation of our roads, which we will see by the quality of the roads, which won't be as good as they were. This question that we should.
I guess in terms of the valuation, what happens is that if a bridge is, and I'm literally quoting off the top of my head here because I'm not sure of the numbers, but if a bridge is usually worth, let's say it's more like probably $5,000 per square metre, where they're impaired, the value will drop that dollar value significantly to reflect that they are impaired in some way. So if we're advising them that we've got impaired sealed roads, then I would expect them to be doing something similar. And not that anyone else probably wants to read the large valuation document, except for those of us who need to. But in there is certainly year on year been a section of it discusses the impaired bridges, and it lists them, and it also lists the ones that were there the previous year, if how long they've been impaired and what's been going on with them, and what does the impairment mean? Does it mean that they're closed, or does it mean that they're on a weight rating of a certain category? So all that information's in there, and they take that into account, which then does reduce the amount of depreciation that comes out the other side of that valuation because it's got a lower value.
Well, I'd rather have higher depreciation and good quality roads than lower depreciation and rubbishy roads. It's been a bit black and white, but that's sort of in a sense what comes. I mean, the bridges have been a clear situation where if you've got to start posting limiting traffic, you start to get this. So look, I don't want to see an impairment, because the right answer is we've got the right funding, we're doing the right both at NZTA and from our community perspective, and we've got the roads. But if we're having robbed the challenge. I go back to my point. Let's ensure, just as we head towards balance state, dare I say, 4 months' time, that we actually think a wee bit about what is the right valuation that should occur around roads, particularly if there's something being built up that we should recognise. Then to go to the political, which I shouldn't, but I will, that actually might have our arguments. Okay, so that would be useful. Thank you for that. I'm sure I've spent more time on that than I need to, but I thought it would be useful to do that. It also means that in effect, in terms of our CapEx plans, I'm looking down again your way, Hartley, we probably will undershoot our CapEx plans for transport as well. That's the bridging thing and the timing and the phasing. Okay, cool. I just wanted to focus on page. Sorry, by the way, any other questions, Jasper and Paul? Thank you for your questions. I'm just going to keep everything through, but if more questions you guys want to ask, I'd rather you did it rather than me necessarily. You right? Sarah, you okay? Yeah, cool. So if I look at page 38, obviously we have budgeted for deficit. I think we all knew that from our LTPs, and for the reasons why, good reasons why. The projection at the moment is that we're $1 million I've got it correct, worse off at year end. Can you tell me why? I'm reading it right, aren't I? The net surplus projected, the budget amount was 6.3, and we're going to be at 7.4 in terms of deficit.
Carry forwards, wouldn't it?
Tell you what, let's not worry about that right now. Believe it or not, I'm about to sort of cut across my question, which is $1 million is almost neither here nor there. And I want to be careful about that, saying that, because I don't want to be quoted. But, it is roughly online, but I do think it would be useful as accountants that we could explain why at this point, 6 months through the year, and it is 6 months through the year, why the result is $1 million worse.
So it will be a combination of what we carried forward and unbudgeted expenditure throughout the year.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it would just be useful. Perhaps as a modest year, as I'm always interested in where we're going to be at year end. Just like I've been talking about the valuation of the assets, what could be our final outturn and result? So I'm interested in that. Yes.
I'll just ask a question that's been really around my mind since we had the discussion around roading, and knowing this is a December result and we're now in late February, and we have 2 more meetings, I think, scheduled for the year.
Yeah.
Is that going to be sufficient for us to have the information we need in order to make good decisions?
That's a good question, and that's a tough one. The question is probably what is driving the worsening as to whether that's one that can be managed, or whether it's actually more related to the externalities of the environment we operate in. So that's why I'd like to suggest that by way of email, you might want to share with the committee why we think we're going to be $1 million off worse, what are the drivers, because then we will be able to decide. And I suggest it has to happen outside the committee at this point. We're going to meet in a month's time. So we'll be able to perhaps come back and address that issue. Is that fair enough?
Yes, it's just been going around my mind.
I agree.
Given it's 6 month result and we're in February and we have time to kind of react if we've got that ability, it's getting limited.
So there will also, coming back to your next meeting, is the forecasted position for 30 June. Now, to be fair, we don't do that. It's not like trying to do a long-term plan or an annual plan, so we don't ask people to look at every line and try and forecast them. We're looking for the big ticket items and what that might look like. So, for example, through that forecasting round, what we will be showing this year is that $4 million of bridge work, or it's about $4 million of bridge work that we're anticipating we can't complete this year because of NZTA approval processes, and that we will be moving that out to the annual plan. It will also reflect the revised NZTA final program that came through for the current year for 24-25. So there will be a reduction in capital and all of that kind of stuff as well, amongst other projects and other, like it will bring in, for example, that Luxmore income as a permanent projection. So that will be coming back to your the next finance and insurance meeting, and then all going to meeting in April.
Look, that's fine. And look, just if I'm sorry that I've perhaps been a bit hard, but I do focus on the net result. Christine, we don't have to focus on too many big numbers. Sorry, too many small numbers. It needs to be the big numbers. So at 31 December, we were actually $4 million in front of where we wanted to be. So we're going to spend that plus another $1 million, end up $1 million worse off come year end June. Now, you might want to come back and say, well, I'd prefer like to come back and recheck my forecast, and you're going to say we're getting a reforecast in March, which is fine, but I'm just wanting to reflect. I'm always going to be looking at where are we going from a net result perspective as an organisation, and why are we heading there? Okay, that's cool. Thank you very much.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
so as an example, like looking at it in terms of saying, how do we ultimately trim that back, or how do we realise that? I mean, if you look at the operating expenditure and you look at community resources and corporate services, I mean, they make up a significant amount of operating expenditure in there. So as an example, is that an area that we could look at in terms of reducing that cost.
I think that's premature because we need that summary that they're going to give us time of what is actually the real big drivers of the result that we've got. And this goes back to Christine's question about is quarterly reporting sufficient on our finances? Essentially that's the question. So let's just see what comes out of that and we'll take it forward. I appreciate that. I mean, the answer to your question is yes. It's the big spend area. What are the big spends in there? Are they attackable when you've got a negative result? So I agree with you. But
when you weigh up all of that, I mean, the sewerage is non-negotiable, stormwater, transport, water supply. They're ones that they're non-negotiable in terms of things that we probably, can't really cut back on, are they? When you weigh it up.
I agree. And I'm with you, mate. And I mean, depreciation is the other biggie. Well, actually, sorry. I always tend to look at it from not activity, but from what are our cost drivers. So, no, look, we can deal with it. Superb. Well, look, again, the value of good information and actually being able to ask a few questions is quite good. I would like to just focus really quickly on the balance sheet. Because again, I'm going to talk about treasury management liability policy later on. So just looking, so we've got two columns here. We've got our position as we signed off 30 June, and we got it 6 months later. And I think it's fair to say, Joni, looking at this, that the critical thing is that ongoing program of our treasury management, of investment in the areas that we are, and we've heard from Milford, but actually the consequent increase in borrowings is there. But we have had ultimately, to meet our capital needs, a net increase in debt of, my figure's around about 14, well, it's not that dumb really, it's around about $14 million a week. What's our net debt got? Well, our net debt, I mean, we've gone from, we've taken on an extra $40 million, but of course part of that is actually just the change. Should this number stack it? Yes, it does. Sorry, 51. I couldn't see the 5. The paid back is $40 million. But in effect, the majority of actually that is the change we're doing in the balance sheet. But the fund capex, we've gone up about $13 million, right? We've taken out in terms of debt. The fund the current capex. Good, that's as planned, so that's fine. I just want to check that one through. That then gets us to the next important part, which is the notes of the financial statements, or actually more over for me, page 45, colleagues, just having a quick look through our financial groups standards. And I just wanted to reflect on it because we touched on this slightly with Indeed Milford as we went through. So look, on an investment side, we're spreading our risk by going to various parties. That's super cool. The second box down on page 45, we've got all those parameters that relate to where we are with our debt, with our net debt, including interest, and they're all tickety-boo in a highly technical term. And the bottom box says that we've got a reasonable spread at this stage of when our debt matures. Obviously, that being important, that we don't want to have everything maturing on one day and be subject to the rates that occur at that stage. So it's good to have that range, Joe. So thanks for that. That then gets us a wee bit over the page to a couple of exceptions. And that's the yellow in the top box, which says that actually as we try and manage our exposure to interest rate risks, we have a certain portion fixed. Whether that's because we've taken out a fixed rate instrument or whether that's because we're using interest rate swaps or something similar, correct?
It's the other way around, this one. So so the dates of this is when we've got several of our loans maturing and we haven't got anything fixed following. So at the moment we are, based on the policy, we're under our required fixed term. So that's what we're working with PwC at the moment to work out what the best option is moving forward.
Now, I'm not trying to be dark here, but technically we're outside our policy is really what it comes down to. I think in effect, Joe, I mean, as you say, we'll catch up over this, but in effect, you're working to correct that position now. Okay, cool. The other thing that we that actually you'll recognise I alluded to was the bottom box, which was Milford Asset, which, you know, this is the concept of being the 60-40 a hard and fast rule. And how do I look at 54-45 in relationship to a 60-40 split? So there's the basic premise of Milford and their assumption reflected, for instance, that in their bond side, which is their income side, they tend to take a stance in the market with corporate bonds, as in contrast to treasury bonds, which have a different risk profile. And I am interested to know what we feel about that. I mean, I'm you know, sort of comfortable institutionally. We've got a couple of good people to invest with, but actually this isn't 60-40. And I think we should perhaps understand better. That's why I want to understand holding a hard 60-40 is, what does that mean? So perhaps we could explore that with Brett this afternoon.
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the things when we talked about at the last meeting.
Yeah.
One of the things that we needed to address as part of our policy decision.
Yeah.
And I think, if I remember rightly, Mike was originally offline saying to me, or saying to you, that there was probably a 15% on either side.
That was with Westpac, so yeah.
Oh, okay, in terms of what our,
Westpac.
so it's really banding, it's actually a bit like your interest rate risk, isn't it? It's more like about having them within a band.
Yeah.
Good, well, I think that should be the case, because I mean, I remember the last meeting, we turned the wheels 27 times over in relationship to 61-38 with BT, so, you know, it makes sense to get that one right. Great. Don?
Yeah, well, the way I understand his movement outside that band is that he's being a bit more conservative at the moment. He's allowed that fund to move to that level.
Yeah, look, yes and no. I mean, I agree. I probably shouldn't try and repeat what he said because it's actually his role gone. I think you're right. And I'm not overly vexed by 54-45. It's just we have a rule that says 60-40. And I'm concerned about us because we say it should be 60-40 and we've got a report saying it's 54-45. Is that good or bad? That's really the key point.
In the actual policy, it says the requirement's to be 50-50 with a maximum of 60-40, which is why we are negotiation. So technically, Milford is actually trading where it should be. Westpac is very fractionally out, but given we're spreading our risk, we are actually currently within the policy threshold.
Joe, very nicely done. Yeah, that's superb. So I'm vexing over what I don't need to vex over. Thank you. That's wonderful.
You might have paid back her comment from earlier.
I'm going to call you, think of you as a birthday girl now, Anne, so there we go. Right, yeah, hey, look, that's really helpful. Thank you for that. And these are relevant, so that's really good to have the fulsome report that we've got here, guys. Perhaps just a wee bit of thinking for me around the net result, which and the drivers, which would be good. So I've done that, guys. I think one, two, we had a couple of questions. Final chance for questions on this report. Yes, Don.
Thanks, Bruce. Just back to page 38. No, I can't see it now. My computer's funny. And the projections there, the income projection, was it 143 million?
Yes, it was. That's the year. That's full year.
Right. And then the operating expenses, 151 million.
Yep.
And so we're going to spend a bit more than we anticipated there. And the capital expenses, just from my understanding, is that over and above the operating expenses? So in total, the organisation is going to be spending about 260 million, is it?
So some of that 151 million will include depreciation.
Okay, how much of, just ballpark?
We'd have to come back to you with that number. I couldn't even ballpark it at this point.
Just so I can understand.
Could some be repayment of debt too?
Yes, so there will be, in the operating expenditure, will be interest repayments and depreciation and
It's in here.
probably the two that I can think of that are not, but we'd have to come back to you around how much that depreciation number looks like.
There was something.
You would think, so.
Yes, so as Councillor Vaporai has indicated, page 40 shows that we've got depreciation and amortisation of a projection of 41.6 million for the year.
Cost of 22, 23 million.
So that's for the total year. Currently 20.8.
Halfway through the year.
So that brings us down to about 210 million of spending then. I'm just trying to get it matched up in my mind. Down to around that 151 million.
Thanks.
But maybe I'll talk offline with these guys to help.
I'd encourage you to, Don. It makes a lot of sense. We could go through the cash flow statement if you're really looking to see what's going through the check account. The cash flow statement as well, but I'd really invite you to have that chance. These folk are available to have a catch up with them, Don, just to check that one through. That'd be great. Wonderful. Any other questions or comments from folk? Rightio. On that basis, I'd like to just move to the recommendations, please, which is, I think essentially that we've received the report. Let's get back to my notes. Thank you. It's that we received the report. I'm comfortable we leave it. We had in the report there was that minor breach in interest rates. I'm conscious that we'll be meeting more on the workshop and you've got actions on that. So I don't propose that we know anything particularly about that. I do have a nice record. So do I? Oh, I've done a lot of talking. I'll move from the view we received. Thank you, Sarah. Any discussion on the motion? If none, I'll put all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, it's carried. Right, got to get to the annual report. Sorry, the annual plan. Next, is that right?
Sure.
Rightio, thank you. So I'll have probably, is it?
I think it might. I was going to go to hiding.
Yes, she actually put out the report. All right, okay. Therese and Nicole, well done. So when I went through the recommendations, there's a whole gazillion of them here, which is a good number, which we will progressively work our way through. In your hands, guys, to lead us off.
So I'm just going to start the conversation just in regards to the 2025-26 annual plan. Of course, remember that this is year 2 of our LTP and we use that as our base. We then look for amendments to that, and those amendments may be as a result of further information that we've acquired around contracts, changing in priorities, changes to actually levels of inflation or budgeted interest rates, which all of those things are applicable. So I guess the purpose today for this report is to propose to Council that there be no formal consultation undertaken, because we've got no significant or material changes that we're going to be discussing in here. We do have the roading issue, but of course we will have considerable consultation about that and that might be a relevant change, and of course that has come to pass. Also, we are looking to seek support to the changes to year 2 and associated years that we have made, just to endorse those to Council. And we're also looking just to recommend the use of the information that we've got presented here today to prepare some information to our community on what's going on in regards to this year. And we'll also be looking to undertake a special consultative process this year on our fees and charges, which I'll talk about a little bit further on. So overall, if we cut right through the chase, we're looking at a rates increase of 7.23% compared to a planned 7.9% that was in the LTP. We've got a number of changes that have occurred in that thing. Now, we've got to remember that the rates impact across our ratepayers will be dependent this year on 2 factors. One, which is the revaluation of properties, which has gone through, so that will change how that rates increase is spread. And we've also, of course, got the rates increase itself. So in summary, at this point, we've got an average of $345 per year for a residential property, or $7 per week increase. So now if I just head over to the main sort of issues that have changed in terms of this document, which is on page 53. I'm just going to run through all of that financial information. So in terms of the roading program itself, overall we've got an $18.9 million reduction for the 3 years of the roading program, which we've talked about before and we're aware of. For this annual plan, that translates into $6.5 million, which is split between the capital and the operating expenditure programs. We continue, of course, to advocate strongly in this area, and I don't know if the Mayor would like to make any comments on that.
Go for it, Rob.
So the roading advocacy is pretty much a full-time job for me at the moment in terms of continuing on the pathway that we've done. So you'll know that I caught up with the Prime Minister late last year, following on from the presentation delivered to Minister Brown. We've since had a change in the ministerial portfolio, so we've got a new Minister of Transport, so I've got to sort of continue to educate but re-educate as well, and caught up with our new Minister for the South Island, so James Meagher, the other day as well, and he's the Associate Transport Minister, so that's handy in those two roles. So I said to him on Monday night that rather than spending 9 full days at 8 hours a day, because that's how long it would take to get around our entire roading network, I can take half an hour of his time and give him a presentation to explain what we've been doing. And Fran's team have been working really hard as well on getting more and more data to back up our argument. So we've been at the initial stages we were talking a lot on the principle, but now we've got good solid data to back up the arguments, specifically around the fare rate. I've got a spreadsheet where we can plug in the different values, because with the thresholds that have changed, so the lower and upper bands, it's lifting councils up. So Auckland, for instance, calculates at -13, and that gets lifted up to 51. Like Selwyn calculates at about 30%, gets lifted up to 51. So it shows the real differentials in the amount of money that's in the pool that can get distributed across all the councils. So NZTA are always saying that they've got this limited funding pool, which we can accept, but it's inside that funding pool how it kind of gets distributed around, and the inequities around that for us. So that data is really useful because you can't argue with the facts. So we're continuing on that journey, and Minister Bishop's about to get educated in that piece as well soon. So it's progressing quite well, and we're getting good sort of follow through. And the unfortunate situations that we're having at the moment with the likes of Waterloo Road, it's providing good exposure in the media as well, and getting up and down the country, getting that awareness, and managed to get on the cover of the Farmers Weekly magazine as well. And Feds are right behind us as well in terms of the farmers are paying more than their fair share of roading, which they always tell us, but now they're telling Wellington as well. So it's progressing quite well.
Cool. So just as an aside to that, although we have reflected in this annual plan the reduction in the roading program, we have maintained our rating level the same for roading, and that's anticipation of what we're talking about, that those additional opportunities may come to us. So we need to have our share of that contribution available. Now, what that means, though, is that, of course, we're going to be collecting some more revenue there, and to balance it out in our books, to balance back to zero, we've actually indicated here to repay debt. So you've got some roading debt there, so it's directly related, so we'll repay that roading debt, and then if there's any excess after that, then that'll go into a roading reserve. But its first port of call will be to fund any opportunities that you so get, but that's how we've approached it in this document. In terms of, just turn the page, in terms of depreciation, of course, we've had to relook at the level of depreciation that we had in year 2. We know that our revaluation for the year into 2024 was significantly higher. When we did the calcs, that means that our roading depreciation increased by about 2.6 million, so we've now incorporated that in. Doesn't result in more hits, but what it does do is that we actually are putting a little bit more to the reserve than what we'd previously indicated. In terms of the waters, we also looked at the depreciation in regards to them after looking at the changes to the valuation. It made very little difference, made 20,000, so we actually haven't changed for that. So we're about 20,000 less than what we potentially should be, but the size was just such that we decided not to process that. In terms of issues that are happening in some of the key areas, in wastewater right now, we've got the land that we purchased at Winton for future disposal, for future sewage disposal. We've got recorded the fact there's some interest in there. We've also recorded the fact that actually when we've been looking at our 24-25 year, there's about $4.2 million worth of works that we've identified that potentially will be moved out to future years. So we have also adjusted the amount of interest and principal that's required in this year. And that's leading to some of those additional resolutions in this report, because one of the things we've always held reasonably firm to is that if we are going to make the change in here, that it's been recorded as a resolution by you to enable us to undertake that. So that's why that's in there. In terms of water, we have had to increase that routine maintenance, as we've discussed with you previously, just to cover off where we've actually seen those levels of costs. So that has been substantial. Along with that has been the repayment of prior year short-term loans to repay those. So you'll remember when I brought the annual report up last year, we talked about the fact how we had to take out an additional loan to cover off our routine maintenance levels. And so we're having to repay that back, plus also increase us to get us to the level where we're actually maintaining it correctly. In terms of projects, so we've just provided a little bit of a table, and some of the stuff was indicated earlier. We will be coming back to you, of course, with forecasting in the 19th of March meeting. So there's going to be more details on this, and it will also expand the information in here. So we will anticipate that after forecasting, there'll be further changes we still have to make to this annual plan. But in terms of overall totals, you'll see our revised expected budget for 24-25 currently is about 27.8. We started this year with a 70.1, and there's been some changes to that, so now it's down to 67.8. The LTP budget itself indicated 72 enough million, and we're looking currently at around 68.2. And that does reflect those community board changes that you'll all have been aware of, and it also reflects some of that priority work that we were just talking about. In terms of, we also just included in there on paragraph 29, because you'll remember we came to you on 4th of December Finance and Assurance meeting and just outlined to you some of the changes that we were planning to the projects, but at a very high level. We've now just put that into a table to provide you with actually some more detail in this space. And since we've developed this report too, we've also identified another couple of areas of projects where we want to make some changes to, and that of course is attached to the table to this report. I'll just hand over to Sam at this point, who might just want to discuss what those are.
Sam, welcome to the meeting.
Again, and thank you, Chair and councillors. Just on page 83 of your agenda, essentially we've got a couple more savings. We're continually looking for these for you, given we know your interest in managing the rates impact on our communities at the moment. Just page 83, we would like to propose deferring, it's called F-Build 030, Waikiwi Yard, New Depot building. 468,000 there. We'd like to defer that out at least a year into 26, 27. Page 84 of the agenda on our community housing budget. FHOUS 17 is the number of the project in your agenda. We're looking to reduce that by 100,000 down to $149,000. That's a re-roofing project there. Hopefully that's some good news for you, and I'm certainly happy to take any questions if you have them.
Sam?
Thanks, Sam, and you've answered a couple of questions I had. Just in relation to community housing replacing roof, is that one roof or is it several roofs on housing, the community houses in that area?
As the budget appears in your agenda, it's 12 units re-roofed in Riverton and 10 units re-roofed in Wyndham. So the reduction that I've talked you through would mean removing the re-roofing component in Wyndham and still going ahead with the 12 units in Riverton.
Thank you, that clarifies that. The second question I have, Andrew, it'd be good to see districts spelt correctly as a minor point on that plan. But I remain uncomfortable with the funding set aside around open spaces for renewing management plans and master plan developments there. Are you intending to look more closely at that and bring us back some clear information on what lies behind those costs?
You certainly acknowledge that concern, and definitely continuing to look at reductions in those budgets. We are going through the tender process for the contractor component of the district-wide review of all of those plans. So we're going to have some good information to come back to council with, and I do expect we'll make significant savings in the overall project budget across the years that we have.
Certainly I'd be more comfortable in agreeing to this on the understanding that information will come back to us to look at the detail and support you looking at that overall at this stage as to what makes up those costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Bruce. I had a very similar question to the Deputy Mayor, and just in terms, and sort of following on from that, like when you look at the list of all the projects there, a lot of them go through the community board and then they get that sort of scrutiny and scoping and everything through the board. With the district ones, are we expecting to get that same level of sort of scoping documents and everything coming through to council? I think you've kind of answered the question, Sam, already, but just double checking that we will be getting the ability to see the scopes for those projects at council before they go ahead.
Certainly, Mayor Rob, we have a draft report for the March council meeting to start a new phase, I guess, of providing you governance information associated with all of those district projects. Yes, so the answer is yes, we will be providing the council that opportunity for those district funded projects to have a governance overview.
Thanks, Sam.
Any other questions while we Ian, I think. Oh, yes, Paul.
If I may, just regarding community housing, Sam, I'm just inquiring about the unit in 56 Seaway Road in Edendale. Is that taken care of in this year's budget? Is that the reason it's not there?
Yes, Councillor, that is correct. That project is currently funded and covered in this year's budgets, and we're still working through awarding a contract to get that renovated and back in the rental pool.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. So just heading down page 56, just looking at that LTP grant and support request. You remember back as part of the LTP, we had a number of communities, trusts come to us in regards to funding opportunities from council. That was the Waikaia Trails, Fiordland Trails, Central Western and Owaka. In regards to the first two, we sort of directed those back to the community boards for them to consider and then put a recommendation through to ourselves. We've now received those recommendations from the community boards, and so what they are looking for was a contestable fund for trails within Southland. I'd also suggested that may be funded from interest on forestry monies. Additional to that, Central Western Archives was also looking for council to change the District Heritage Fund to be a contestable fund, so that they may actually apply to that fund. And also, on top of that, the Owaka Going Forward group, we're looking for council just to support it in its plan to achieve status as a dark sky sanctuary. We've had some discussions just informally about that. At this stage, council staff are recommending that we don't create that contestable fund, given the other commitments that we've got currently. In terms of the Owaka Going Forward group, we're just recommending there that we support it, but that also we suggest to them that they approach Great South in terms of that support, and in terms of Central Western, that at some stage we look to bring, and for the next LTP, we look to bring some information back just for you to consider in regards to that fund. In terms of fees and charges, as I noted previously, we've got a number of our fees. The way council sets fees and charges is set in legislative. And there is some of the legislation that requires us to undertake a special consultation procedure. So what we are planning this year to do is to undertake that for those and any others that we identify as being required. On top of that, we also have noted that there's a number of electricity changes to the Electricity Act, and we're just working through those. So we may have some more proposed changes that we need to process through for that as well in the distant future. So that's just covering off the main changes that are happening in the document. Is there any questions on that before I hand over to Nicole to talk about the rate? I'll hand it over to Teresa to talk about the financials and the impact on them.
Any other questions folk at stage?
Just one question. There was the Garston Play Centre building exterior paintwork for $30,000. Do we own that building? What's the reason that we're
Through Mr. Chair, Markle.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we own the building.
Okay. And is that a project that, are they eligible for outside funding from that Northern Southland Fund or any other sources?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would have to find out for you.
Okay.
Thank you. Just on that table, sometimes it notes the inflation increase is 3%, and other times 4%, and other times 5%. That's around the fees and charges. So is that not a standard type of payment, or can we help?
No, so the managers look at their fees and charges and consider the appropriateness of them, and so they're not always standard because they do reflect sometimes the actual cost that it does take to undertake some of that work, so there is variance that will occur.
I think through you,
Some areas is greater.
say as well, just we need to work through those comments to make sure that they give an indication of the driver, so we've still got to do that review with the managers to make sure they're reflected.
Okay, thank you, because I imagine it's a question the public will ask.
And sometimes like wage inflation will run higher than some contract inflation, so there can be different inflation rates happening and that they're incurring, so.
Yes, I thought that's probably the case, but it'd be useful to have the explanation. And then, thank you.
So through you. Yeah, and just your comment around the regulation that applies to fees and charges for the electricity industry, in particular for CIASA. Do we have any risks associated with that, considering the amount of resource and investment we're putting into that scheme through that renewable energy space? Are we open to some risks there?
In terms of the setting of the fees and charges?
Yeah, in terms of that regulation?
Not that I'm aware of at this point in time, but we do, that's why we are following through on it. I don't know whether Fran, no, Susan, no.
So there are some, and unfortunately I'm not completely close to it. There's another member of staff who is a lot closer to it, but there are some of the things about it has to be fair and reasonable and looking to ensure you're not making excessive profits and those kinds of things. So given the fact that for CIASA as a whole, our line charge and our kilowatt charge are only, there's still rates going into that business unit, so it's not actually at the choice of the community board, it's not fully recovering, so it's not like it's returning profits in terms of that excessive profit. We do need to look at, so we're reasonably comfortable around those top two fees that we've got currently. Our other fees, we want to make sure that we are in line with and recovering appropriately and checking some of the wording so that it's, as someone else looks and reads at a fee and charge schedule, some people have gone, oh, actually, I don't know that that's how I would necessarily interpret. So we just want to make sure some of that wording is quite clear as well. In terms of the the project that's underway, I guess the statement will be we will have to continue to revise our fees and charges depending on what our costs look like. So if our costs suddenly decrease, then we have to be making sure we're not making excessive profit.
Thank you. Any other questions on this stage? Thank you.
I'm going to summarise the changes in the key financial information, which starts on page 60 of your agenda, and prospective financial statements are in attachment B. The comparisons that I'm doing are between the 2025 long-term plan and the 2025 annual plan. For the profit and loss, council's planned deficit is 8.5 million, which is 6.6 million more than that indicated in the long-term plan. And these are mainly due to other revenue has decreased by 1.2 million. Grants and subsidies, including the NZTA, have reduced by 2 million, and interest and dividends have reduced by 1.65 million. The expenses, employee expenses have increased by 0.76 million. Finance costs have decreased by 0.86 million, and other council expenditure has decreased by 1.26 million. And that's just a high level, but it has broken down further on page 60. The benchmarks are shown on page 62 of the agenda. Council is required under the Local Government Regulations 2014 and Section 100 of the Local Government Act 2002 to report against a set of benchmarks around three key elements of financial prudence and affordability, sustainability and predictability. As shown in the table on page 62, Council is meeting all of the benchmarks except for the balanced budget benchmark. The balanced budget benchmark requires Council to ensure that the projected operating revenues are set at a level that is sufficient to meet the projected operating expenditure, and Council will not be meeting this benchmark during this period. And it was documented in the long-term plan that the benchmark will not be balanced until 2031-32 financial year. In the balance sheet, the forestry assets have decreased by 1 million, which is basically reflecting the open position of 23-24 in the report. Reserves decreased by 6.2 million, mainly due to a 3.2 million for early repayment of loans and a 1.7 million for forecasting changes. The long-term investment decreased by 4.1 million, and that's as the reserves have decreased, the investments are going to be decreasing. Intangible assets have increased by 1 million, and this is actually due to the admissions tracking scheme. The revaluation of that, which is reflected in the opening balances, also flows on from the annual. And borrowings, which is current and non-current, decreased by 8 million from 138.5 million to 140 million. And this is mainly due to the change in the opening balances for 24-25. This was projected to be 102 million, and this is now 94 million, mainly due to the repayment of 42 loans, which come to 3.2 million, and adjusting for forecasting changes due to timings. The property, plant and equipment is reducing by 25 million, and this is mainly due to the timing of projects. And then pass on to
I'm assuming I'm going now. So I'm just basically wrapping up. So these guys have all talked about what's happening financially in the organisation, and I'm just going to specifically go to the road side of things, as I normally do. And so just so that you have that sense of, well, what is the average person and how they're going to be affected. And so the report does have some graphs and information in there, but I'm just going to summarise them on the screen. So obviously we've talked about today that the total rates increase is 7.23% as at this moment in time. Not everybody, as you well know, will have a 7.23% increase, okay? And we will be making that rate search tool available online so people can see their individual properties. But always remember it relies on what sort of property it is. Is it a forestry property? Is it a farming property? Is it a residential property? Because we have a couple of rates that rate differently, like the community board rates, like the roading rate. They're all rated differently. The location and what services they get. Oh, that's happening. But also particularly this year, the revaluation. So the average CV change was 9.5% across the district, but some sectors went up more than that and some went down lower than that. So the sectors that had the CV increase higher, they'll end up paying a greater share of the CV rates that we charge, which is the general rate and the roading rate, and the sectors that have a increase, or if your property has an increase lower than the average, you'll pay a less share of those. And that's basically this graph that we've seen before. So you can see that through the revaluation, residential, lifestyle, commercial, industrial, forestry, they all had valuation increases, which are going to increase their share of those capital value rates, as opposed to the farming sector or farming and dairy, and they experience decreases. So they're going to pay less of a proportionate share of those CV rates. However, those budgets are going up, so they will in effect get an increase, but they won't get the same increase that they would have had if we. So there's a graph in the report there that just gives an indication of the number of properties and what are their rates changes going to be by land use. And so basically if you're blue, you're residential. So you can see the big bars for residential. They're pretty much going to have a rate change between $200 and $400. Most properties are going to be in that space there. As opposed to farming or rural properties, you can see there's a real mix in there. Now these properties here at this end, they are largely dairy farms, okay? So mostly dairy farms will be over $400. The ones that are down here lower are the pastoral farms. And if you remember to that slide that we saw before, their valuation didn't have a massive increase. So they're paying less, so the increase is less than what it would otherwise be. And this table here is just showing what the average change is for each land use type. So you can see the ones I've highlighted there are those residentials, the industrial and the forestry sectors which had those higher valuations. So their percentage increase is above that 7% basically that we talked about earlier. So like an average dairy farm property that's worth $7.3 million, they will have an average rate change of $915, which will be 7%. Okay? So that table there just gives you a bit of an indication about what the different types of land use changes are having. In terms of looking at towns, so this is just the number of properties in each town and what their rate changes are going to be. So just because the bar is high doesn't mean it's bad, just means there's a lot of properties in Te Anau, okay? And so we can see in Te Anau, if we look at the blue bar, we're going to have probably half or a third of them at $300 to $400, a third of them at $400 to $500, and a quarter of them at over $500, okay? And some of that will be because of the valuation, that they had higher valuation increases. Whereas over here on Stewart Island, most of their increase is going to be, most of those property increases is going to be between $200 and $300 for a residential property. And so here it's the same information, but just by township here. So you can see if we look at Te Anau, their average rate change for a property that's worth $761,000 will be $472 or 11%. Whereas, I mean, they're not massively outside of the average that we're expecting, around 7%, but those ones here with the valuations higher are pushing a little bit above that. It's giving you a bit of an idea. I'll leave it up there for you to have a look at your towns and then any questions about that.
Not Southland listed at all.
That was me, yeah, that was.
I didn't know which bar you got.
So there's a mixture of things, and mostly these town rate changes, they are influenced a lot by the water, the sewage rate changes. They whereas those rural ones, the farming ones, it's largely the roading rates that's having them be. But like I said, the increase in the values of the residential and lifestyle sector is picking up more of those costs than they are. So some of those costs are moving on to the urban sector and away from the rural sector because of the revaluation.
Has anyone got any questions for Nicole? I just want to quickly just jump back to a couple of points that I did miss just in my conversation because I jumped from revaluation. So I just did want to highlight, and we have talked about in our workshop situation, but just the use of that district operations reserve also to replace loans. So this our district operations reserve is generally made up from surpluses from district operations, which are typically funded from our district general rate. So as at the 30th of June, this reserve had around $6.76 million in it. And based on the LTP, that was budgeted at its lowest point to get down to 3.75%. So part of our discussions previously has been around the factors, should we actually be utilising that reserve to repay back some of our loans? So this annual plan also includes that. So we've budgeted at $3.23 million to be repaid, and you'll see there's a separate attachment in the report that outlines what those were. But those loans had a remaining term of between 1 and 8 years, and they were loans that were associated with the district rate, trying to make sure that if we collected for one purpose, that we're using it for that same purpose. So that has made some interest and principal savings also in this document of around $726,000 because we'll be actioning that in the current year we're in to get the next year. So that's another resolution, extra resolution. The other thing just to highlight too was just the internal loans, budgeting to be around about $115 million, which is around $9 million less than what we had in the LTP projection. And that principally is around the fact of just delayed delivery times of projects and moving stuff out. Also, overall, that level of interest and principal is reduced because, of course, we did reduce our interest rate from that roughly 5.7% right down to around the 4.9%. So that's also had an impact. In terms of other things going on, you'll remember that Ojai Forest was removed out of this plan because you're undertaking the Ojai Forest felling in this current year we're in. So we'd had originally planned it for next year, but you'd subsequently said no, you wanted it this year, so that's now been removed. But it will be reflected in this year's result as part of forecasting. So that really is probably the sum of the stuff I missed. So yeah. In terms of the resolutions, as the Chair said, and I'm sure you'll just go through them, but hopefully it does reflect all of the things that I've been talking about today, which I presume you'll take through in due course. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So look, final set of questions. What I propose to do is just to very quickly run through. They are important sets of resolutions to run through those, but are there any general questions in here before I
Oh, just wondering, and I probably should know. So the operations reserve you're talking about, Anne's nothing to do with the old South Roads Reserve?
No, it's just that operating reserve, just the ups and downs from surpluses, generally from rates we've collected, maybe not spent for whatever reason, maybe processed in there, could be the odd property sale or something like that, but yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A comment more than a question, but I think just we need to reflect on the amount of work that's got into bringing this number in less than the predicted amount that was in the LTP. So I think we had 7.8% for year 2 of the LTP, and we're coming in under that. And I know in November we were looking at a number that was around 9.4. So I guess I just want to acknowledge the amount of work that's gone into getting that number down to where it is, and it's not by actually deferring maintenance or anything like that. There's been some good work in there. So just a comment, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And well, I'd like to acknowledge the good work that's gone into this as well. But further to Tom's point earlier, there's well, to Tom's point, but 10% rate increase, and this is on top of some quite big rate increases over the previous years. It's going to be a pretty tough pill for a lot of people to swallow in the district. And I appreciate the good work that Rob's doing, trying to extract more money out of the government for roading. But like Tom said, this organisation spends a lot of money that's not directly related to infrastructure and community leadership, community resources, corporate services. Just round figures, it's about $60 million. And I don't think we'd have to look at some of those numbers too hard to find some savings that could bring this rate increase down to around about the rate of inflation, which I think would be get a bit more acceptance from the community. So I'm not applauding it just quite as much as the Mayor is, that's for sure.
Miss Tom, any other thoughts? Rightio. Let's go to the resolutions, please. That's the first thing that we need to try and push through here. I see the iron hand of chairing has suddenly turned to ash, by the way, in terms of timing. We'll get ourselves there. Okay. So we're going to receive the report. Actually, it's really important, by the way, B and C, because we've got a key question to make. So D is we receive the annual plan financial statements the detailed project listing, draft fees and charges, as we have got inside here and had a chance to look through. So E is that we are going to recommend that the following changes be approved for 24-25 as requested by the community boards, and they'll be incorporated into the 25-26 opening balances. Okay, so I think in effect it's just getting some things tied up so that we start the year correctly. It's actually really important, particularly from an opening balance perspective. F, G and H relate to what I take as being some interesting suggestions coming through from at least a couple of community boards around a contestable fund. But I guess the net impact of this, Anne, is that at this stage, council is saying we're not going to progress the idea of a contestable fund or put money into a contestable fund that can be contested for. So in effect, it is a thank you, but no thank you set of resolutions as it stands at the moment. I think I and Jay, and actually Kay, represent a request that staff can continue to do more work or talk to other people about matters again that have arisen in the course of their annual plan discussions. So that's the Central Western Archives, it's a District Heritage Fund, and it's the OWACA Going Forward group with the, I take it, the Dark Sky concert. So we're saying that actually we ask that be pursued, but it's got no impact at this point in terms of our budget. So there we go. Excuse me. Al is referring to a very key part that you just added at the end there, which is that we are making use, if I've got correct, of our district reserve to tidy up some of those, actually what looks like relatively minor internal loans, but actually has a good impact of just getting rid of some debt through use of genuine reserves that exist and reduce that, and we've got that in attachment C. M is that we consider the projected draft financial results, and guys have taken us through this well, including the projected operating deficit, and actually that we assert that it is financially prudent. I'd like to reflect that, and the resolution goes on to note the primary reason why the budget is unbalanced, which relates to non-funding, if that's the correct word, of depreciation. Recognising that I think, as you said, Teresa, it's at 3132, the LTP has planned to recover that situation, or rather to be balanced by then. I don't think it recovers. We've still got an old depreciation we haven't funded. And so consequently, as is required by the Act, we actually have to make a resolution that we would agree that actually it is financially prudent to set an unbalanced budget. That's within the umbrella area that we have done that through the LTP. Because in the LTP we've agreed that until 31/32 this position will be maintained and that it's prudent. End is an important one, which is that we agree and recommend to council that no formal consultation occur on the annual plan. Okay, and this goes right back to the original point, which I think you know, Anne, that in essence we are maintaining the levels of service generally as outlined in your LTP, and our rating track is basically the same as that inside the LTP. In fact, as you've said, Rob, is slightly lower. So while there may be some changes in revenue and expenditure figures, essentially we are planning to deliver to the community what we've already discussed with them last year through the LTP. If that is true from your perspective, it is reasonable to resolve that we don't actually go through a full consultation process on our O is that we recommend, and I take it we have to actually, by the way, do a special considerable procedure around the fees and charges as we have already discussed in the morning. P is that we recommend council approve the use of the relevant information provided in this report to support provision of information to the community. So it's essentially saying, please tell the community what we're doing. We can't just in a dark room pass a resolution. We need to go out and tell them what we're doing so that they can be fully informed. And I suspect the rates calculator that you've talked about, Nicole, are a really pivotal part of actually that level of communication with our community, albeit within the promise we are keeping to the course that we set out with you last year in the LTP. And that we acknowledge that changes to the financial rate information may occur in finalising the annual plan in June 2025. So there's one or two other things that you've mentioned that you're just trying to finalise. So it could have a small change in those numbers, we're really allowing for the fact that there could be some modest fallouts. So that's the whole suite. What I would just like to do is I'd like to, unless there's a need, to treat those all as one resolution. But before I ask, is there a mover? I just would like to go back to the no formal consultation. This is actually, I think, an important call for you to recommend to council. It's actually saying, community, we've heard your views last year, we're keeping on course, we just want to crack on. It does mean formally, you're not talking this year with the community about your plans. And I would just like to check that you are happy with that and have a debate if we have to, because the proposition is that we don't consult Rob.
Thanks, Bruce. I think I don't think we'd say we're not talking to our communities about the plans. I think the difference is that we're not consulting with the plans. So I think we need to inform the community the pathway that we're taking and why we're taking it, and it's important to, I hate this expression, but keep them on the journey with us. But yeah, I think that making sure that there's a clear expectation that we're not actually consulting and that we have actually come in under the projected figure, and we were doing a whole lot of consulting not that long ago. So it would almost be remiss of us to go back out and consult, because we'd be setting false expectations. So.
Thank you. Dom, have you got it? And then Sarah.
Oh, thanks, Bruce. It's just about M, actually. Just
about M
being financially prudent.
Yep.
And you're going to put it all forward as one resolution.
I proposed to. Are you asking me to do something different?
If you could separate that out, because I'm actually a wee bit uncomfortable about that one, given that the organisation hasn't actually tried to reduce some costs across the board to balance the budget.
That's not an accurate reflection of what's happened.
In what way, sorry, Rob?
In the way that what I stated before, over the last few months, we were in November, we were looking at about a 9.4% increase, and the fact that we're looking at a just above 7, there's been quite a lot of work in reducing costs. I'm not just trying, but actually delivering.
Yes, okay, so in reflecting there's been costs, I think Don's point, Rob, was actually that we need to conclude that the plan with a deficit is financially prudent. Otherwise, we shouldn't be passing it. So I take that board on point, but I also take your point that actually, in reflection to start, we've had a lot of hard yards and numbers have been brought down. Sarah?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think if, to the Mayor's point, if we have that conversation with the public, it would be really beneficial to actually highlight the cost saving as well in that communication, because there is a substantial cost to consultation. And if we highlight that saving, I think that's just an additional indication of us being prudent in our approach.
Right. Any other comments that folk would like to make at this stage?
Well, sorry, just one more if I may. Just in terms of the discussion that the GM of Customer and Community Wellbeing had around potentially reducing some of those budgets, do we need to reflect that, at the risk of adding another recommendation in there, but do we need to reflect that discussion just in terms of capturing that piece of work, because there might be amendments made later on, or does that just get captured in the draft?
That's a good point. I took the intention, Rob, that came under Q, the last leg of the recommendation, where there should still be some changes. Now, my assumption is, by the way, that we're essentially under Q agreeing to minor changes and nothing substantive. Otherwise, I think we'd have to say that needs to in some way be re-seen by council. But I think we are acknowledging that what Sam's doing and whatever else is happening elsewhere, there may well be the odd adjustment. And it appears as if anything, it's an adjustment down, which is quite good. Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think reflecting on Councillor Byers' point, it would be helpful if M is considered separately, not just because of the financial expenses that are there, but also the uncertainty around Three Waters. And can we really say that, the projected return to surplus, there is still a lot of gaps there in our understanding of where the final figure would land, what we go ahead with. So I think perhaps it is better that one is separate.
I can see that I need to take some of this separately. Jesprit, I would just reflect, we're looking at the next 12 months, not actually the next 5
There is
years.
that point to noting the projected return to surplus at 2031-32. as per it continues that particular point,
We could actually take that out.
all right.
Back out that phrase, if that would help you. But I want to reflect. This is about, is this current year's plan prudent? Mind you, I mean, I could argue against that. That actually it is useful to look forward. It's interesting, Jess, but I've been part of many conversations recently around annual plans and plans. It's difficult to hold our LTP as a substantive document in light of the three water changes. Now, I don't want to discredit long-term plans, but it's just the ground is changing so rapidly and so uncertain. Anything I know about the LTP, it won't turn out that way. So there are challenges, and that actually, again, what you think about three waters also potentially impacts what you think about depreciation. Because if we look for three waters reform and we go a certain way, that depreciation is not our issue. If I put it from a selfish perspective of being council, it is still an issue for the ratepayer because they've become a consumer payment. But I take it as I think I get the sense that we need to treat M separately. I'd like to treat N separately as well. Any other comments or questions folks would like to make? Yes, Paul?
Just regarding the consultation, I guess if, say, a sector, I mean, I think we need to portray that we're not going through the formal consultation, but we're still open for conversations. Because if, say, this forestry sector wanted to talk to us about the rate increase, we would always listen, as it were.
Well, I think you made a good point. So, this is why I say and this one, Rob said what he said, and you have, Sarah, is actually what are you trying to achieve? What does it mean going out with the information? Because this is saying we've broadly heard the community last year. We're on track with what we heard last year. Let's just crack on. Okay. And I mean, my personal view is that actually it's a good thing. I don't know why we would want to go through the cost of consultation. Okay, I try and avoid that cost, but it does mean, Paul, if in going out with information, people say, well, wait a second, I don't know if I quite agree with you now. Circumstances have changed. What would we do as a council prior to moving to adopt in June? I don't think we need to have, I think it's wise that you've raised that, but I just think as you go through the preparation, assuming you don't want to go to consultation, and I'm not recommending that we do, just need to go and get aligned as to what do we do if people choose to write in and say, well, actually, I'd like to have a view about your annual plan.
Sorry, through you, Mr.
Yeah, Tom.
I know that we're talking about this from an annual perspective, but we are effectively saying that our balanced budget over the next 7 years, based on our income and expenditure, is not going to be met. So how do we formulate that into a discussion with regards to dealing with our ratepayers?
Oh, in terms of communication. Yeah, well, I mean, I think that really comes back to the reasons why technically the budget is not balanced, which is the challenge of depreciation. Right. Okay, and the primary problem is actually a vast asset base, which we should, by the way, appropriately value on a current value basis to replacement cost, relative to a low density, small population.
Yeah. So
we are in effect funding our renewals, and we're going a reasonable way towards our depreciation. But to cover all depreciation in 1 year could be done, but it would be an imposition on the community, which would be hard to bear.
I think through you, Mr. Chair, when we looked at the LTP, if we were going to fund depreciation fully on the waters, and it's the waters we're not, the rate increase would have been an additional 9% for the LTP in year one, if we were to do that. So you balanced up that objective with, over time, working towards that at that time.
I would like to say, Tom, that does not mean to say that our costs are covered. We are avoiding a cost. There's an argument here that this is kicking the can down the road. Because, somewhere that 9% has to be made up when we come to renew the asset.
That's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I said, even under the financial review that we did this morning, I talked about impairment. Are we actually building up something here which we need to recognise? Not necessarily in this case, in the roading case, through Hartley's desire, but actually just what is the funding that is available to us? Does it actually reflect that our roading network is going backwards? So I think that's it. But at the moment, we aren't meeting that accepted economic cost of the use of these assets. As you said, Nicole, an extra 9% if you want to fund this year. So we're saying that we've got this under control. It may not be desirable, but it's still prudent. Yes, Rick.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just one last question, since Tom spoke about depreciation. What, if I may inquire, what quantum of the 7.23% rate rise is depreciation, please? I should remember, but I've forgotten.
Probably, did you write it in?
No, I haven't. I'll
We'll have to find that out.
Thank you.
I am looking to see if somebody's prepared to move these motions, although when it comes to the voting scene, I think I would separate out item M and treat it as separate in terms of voting, but I'd look to see if somebody's prepared to move. Thank you, I appreciate that. I'm seconder. Thank you, Paul. Right, I think we've had actually a fair discussion on the motion, so I'm not going to say it's any discussion. What I would like to do then, please, is to deal with all recommendations as a vote, except for M. Okay? M as in Mary. If that's the case, I will put the motion. We've got Rob and Paul seconding. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. So as a separate part of that, I'd like to take M, which is that we consider it to be financially prudent. I'll do it on the call of voices. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against?
Nay.
And I take it you'd like your names recorded, Don and Jasper. So the motion is passed. Thank you. Right, guys, as I said, the iron hand of chairing has failed abysmally again. We need to keep going, but I'm conscious we should have, those are two very substantive cases we've got through. I've got Jane online, and I'll be very keen that we move. So, in fact, before you go, or before, yes, you go, I think I can move into public excluded. Is that right? Thank you. So we do have the resolution to move into public excluded for the one item we have, the strategic